Peace and love, brothers and sisters. It is I, your humble brother, Deon Day Belmont from the illustrious noble house of Belmont, and today is July 9th, 2976 of the Berber calendar, which is equivalent to your 2026 Gregorian calendar. And like always, it is a beautiful time to be alive. But first, I always have to give honors to who? To our great creator, our divine father, as well as our divine mother. And I said creator because, it's they're just one when they created this. And I don't want to get too far off into that, but it is what it is. We're just going to accept it for what it, how we say it. But also too want to give, like I said, give honors to our ancestors, those who have come and gone, the kings and queens who have come and gone, as well the saints, martyrs who have come and gone, who have done their due diligence here on the earthly plane, especially when it comes down to making sure that the people who need to hear this information hear it at the time that they can hear it, and that is right now, which is very important because history has a way to repeat itself. And I'm not just saying this just to be saying this, but I'm saying this because I've been paying attention to the rhythm of life, and the rhythm of life has been showing me a pattern. And based off of that pattern, I'm seeing that something is boiling to repeat very soon. And that's the reason why today's lesson is going to be very important. And that is talking about what? Penal transportation from the British Empire territory, aka the areas where we call England, Ireland, and Scotland, and send them here in the territories that we call America. So we want to definitely pay attention to this video. Once again, want to give a recognition out to those who are doing the good deeds and random acts of kindness all the time within the realm. Like I explain here all the time, we're looking for those, or not even looking, but we're hoping to attract those who heart is in the right place, who have done, once again, who good deeds and acts of kindness throughout their life, or if they have cleaned their life up to consistently do what it is that they're supposed to do, and that is been on the up and up, been able to help teach humanity, those who have a hard time, been able to, keep themselves on the up and up. And that's most of the time because the principles and the foundation that they need, it may not be there. It may have been, for here or there, it may have just been something that was not part of their everyday life. And now that we have the opportunity to be able to look through the books, look through the historical documents and archives, we're now being able to put ourselves back together again. And that's why I'm saying genealogy is one of those things that we have to utilize to help find ourselves back to the foundation that we come from. So therefore we can put ourselves back in the upright stance again. And that is based off of the capacity who we were before our predecessors have failed in that time that they did fall in. And so with that being said, I want to go ahead and get started with the video. First, I want to make sure that you do like, share, subscribe to the channel, because it's not too many channels that I know of who's actually put in this claim out there in the world, letting you know that this is who they are. These are the people who they come from, and to be able to stand on that, not only from their so-called conviction, but also from, like I said, instrumentation that we can now utilize that's inside the public domain. And that's what we're going to do today on this build. So once again, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment down there at the bottom of the page. So therefore we know that you are engaging, and any questions you may have, I can go ahead and answer them. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. All right, so definitely wanted to get started with what we have right here. Penal transportation. Now, from a few of the other videos I have been uploading recently, have been pretty much talking about the Old Bailey proceedings, and within the Old Bailey proceedings, part of the conviction that many of the defendants end up getting was their punishment was transportation, and this is what we call penal transportation. So let me go ahead and bring up, just bring up a case real quick. You know what? We'll pull that up when we get the chance. I don't want to keep you all day. All right, so penal transportation, or simply transportation, was the relocation of convicted criminals or other persons regarded as undesirable to a distant place, often a colony, for a specified term. Later, specifically established penal colonies became their destination. All right, so I'm going to read the last part. For a specified term, later, specifically established penal colonies became their destination. All right. While the prisoners may have been released once the sentences were served, they generally did not have the resources to return home. Pause. All right, so from what we are reading from penal transportation, that many convicts, once they arrived to their destination, which was a long, a distant territory, like say for instance, America was considered a distant territory, Australia was considered a distant territory, Africa was considered distant territories, the islands that the British Empire, also the English Empire claimed dominion over. These were considered also overseas possessions, but they were also penal colonies based off of how they were operating. And so now we see that a lot of the convicts who were sent to these locations didn't generally have the resources to return home if they had the potential to come back. And based off of the records, a lot of them did not have the ability to return. And as we see, resources was one of those reasons. So for those of you who have ancestors who were sent over as prisoners, you know, you're going to see what all type of prisoners they're talking about. Many of them didn't have the resources or the ability to return to their ancestral home or to the homes that they come from, that they were sent from. So this is going to now start making sense once you do your genealogy, once again, to show that many of you, just because you've been here for about maybe 500 years almost, you pretty much, still have ties to where you come from. All right. So origin and implementation. All right, so banishment or forced exile from a polity or society has been used as a punishment since at least the 5th century BC in ancient Greece. The practice since at least the 5th century, practice since 5th century BC in ancient Greece. The practice of penal transportation reached its height in the British Empire during the 18th and 19th centuries. All right, so that's the 1700s and 1800s. Transportation removed the offender from society, mostly permanently, but was seen as more merciful than capital punishment. This method was used for criminals, debtors, military prisoners, and political prisoners. Pause. So these were those who qualified to be considered underneath the punishment transportation. You didn't have to be doing like a heinous crime, as you can see, political prisoners. So we're going to talk about those political prisoners because part of those political prisoners, especially during the time they say at the height of the penal transportation, were those who we can clearly see were known as Jacobites. Not only those Jacobites, those who were known as Protestants, who were going against the Catholics, or the Catholics going against the Protestants. But we know during this time, because the British Empire, they're Protestant, they were actually going against the Catholics. So there are many people who are getting caught up during this time, and not just the political prisoners, but you got to think about the military. So prisoners of war, that's other folks who you can see who you're tied to that were sent over here. Then you had the debtors. So folks who couldn't pay, who owed debt. You owed money to somebody, to one of the corporations in the time. Because yes, corporations existed for quite some time. For those who don't know, you owe someone, you own a business, you own the government. Those are the reasons and gave them to send you outside the so-called society. And first they made, I won't say all of them, but most of the cases you went to court. So there should be some type of court documentations. And as we saw from the Old Bailey proceedings, there are various cases in regards to people being punished and sent over here via transportation to the Americas. All right. So, and we're going to show once again the Jacobite gleanings to show those people who also were considered prisoners or political prisoners. Penal transportation was also used as a method of colonization. For example, from the earliest days of English colonial schemes, new settlements beyond the seas were seen as a way to alleviate domestic social problems of criminals and the poor, as well to increase the colonial labor force for the overall benefit of the realm. Pause. So criminals, I mean, as we can see, those military prisoners, political prisoners, just regular criminals, all were sent to the colonies to colonize it. So this is the foundation, as you can see, of the colonies. I hope you brothers and sisters understand this is the foundation. The foundation wasn't, as we see or we thought, built off of happiness and joy. No, it's built off of punishment. You were sending folks who you were punishing to the colonies. All right. Great Britain and the British Empire. So this is the point I really want to get to, because we know America itself was underneath Great Britain. And we know America itself still is tied to Great Britain. For those who don't know, yes, it is. And then also why? Because many of you, as you see, your ancestors were sent over here and were still subjects. So, and based off of the English common law, you can never throw off your allegiance, even if you don't remember that you have that allegiance. Once it's been proven that you had ties based off of ancestry, then the king or the monarch can always claim, claim what I say, subjectivity over you. I know there's new so-called statutes out now that that contradicts that, but historically, that's what the case was. So initially it says, based on a royal prerogative of mercy, and later under English law, transportation was an alternative sentence imposed for a felony. It was typically imposed for offenses for which death was deemed too severe. By 1670, as new felonies were defined, the option of being sentenced to transportation was allowed. Depending on the crime, the sentence was imposed for life or for a set period of years. If imposed for a period of years, the offender was permitted to return home after serving their time, but had to make their own way back. Many offenders thus stayed in the colony as free persons and might obtain employment as jailers or other servants of the penal colony. Pause. So, as you can see, many folks, and this is going all the way back to the 1600s, brothers and sisters, which we call the 17th century. So we had them dealing with transportation going all the way back to that time. So this is right even before so-called transatlantic slavery. This is before so-called transatlantic slavery from the so-called British perspective. Let's just say that. So this was all indentured servitude. So they were sending criminals out underneath the auspices of being becoming, like I said, employed in the colonies to do laborious work. And then after you got done, after serving out your sentence, which was no longer than 7 years, sometimes 14, but it was normally was 7 years. Once you were done with your sentence, you can return home if you were in one of those who was banished for life. Now, because of how expensive it was to come over, a lot, as they say, couldn't even return. So they just became free persons of the colonies. And we know the colonies became the what? The free several states. All right, so they just came to start working, became servants. And there's proof of that. You know, like they say, such and such a Negro servant. Whenever you hear that term servant, that means they were underneath indentured servitude. All right. England transported an estimated 50,000 to 120,000 convicts and political prisoners, as well as prisoners of war from Scotland and Ireland, to its overseas colonies in the Americas from the 1610s until early in the American Revolution in 1776, when transportation to America was temporarily suspended by the Criminal Law Act of 1776, and that was underneath King George III. Pause. So, as I'm explained many times, that they were sending those brothers and sisters from England, Ireland, and Scotland who qualified to be underneath transportation, who were considered what? Criminals, debtors, military prisoners, or prisoners of war, and then also those who were what's the other one? Yeah, political prisoners. I thought I said that. Political prisoners. All right, so like those who didn't want to go with the agenda, those who they considered nonconformist. All right, so if you was considered or seen as a nonconformist, then they found ways to get you up out of there. And during this time, the legal judicial system was brutal. It was brutal. Like folks were literally getting declined or deleted. The term deleted because of like petty offenses, like how we read from one of the cases when they stole over, was it 200 shillings? So that shows how extreme the times was at that, or the law was at that time. So when you're reading or you're doing your research, brothers and sisters, you have to put yourself in that historical context. You had to see how things were operating at that time and not how you modernly see things operating and trying to, placate that onto how they were doing things back then. Yes, it was horrible. It was atrocious. And in a way, it's you can call it sinister. But people from multiple different so-called complexions, it didn't matter what your so-called skin complexion was during these times. Unfortunately, some had it worse than others, but everybody was suffering from the justice system. It says the practice was mandated in Scotland by the Transportation, etc. Act of 1785, which was by King George III, but was less used there than in England. Transportation on a large scale resumed with the departure of the first fleet to Australia in 1787 and continued there until 1868. Pause. So once the American Revolution took place, when they stopped doing transportation here, they decided to resume it to send them to Australia. All right. So, of course, we know that's a lot further, a lot further. And Australia was considered the penal colony from that standpoint. From that point on, that was considered the penal colony of the British Empire, was Australia at that time. After they no longer send it to England. And also, too, they were sending them to Africa. Yes, they were sending to Africa as well. So it says transportation was not used by Scotland before the Act of Union 1707. Following a union, the Transportation Act of 1717, underneath King George I, specifically excluded its use in Scotland. All right, so they said they weren't utilizing or sending folks out of Scotland via transportation at that time in 1717. But under the Transportation Act of 1785, King George III, the Parliament of Great Britain specifically extended the usage of transportation to Scotland. All right, so once King George came back, or King George III came, and the Transportation Act of 1785 changed that and said, like, nope, send them out, criminals, whatever, who we feel fit, send them up out of Scotland, send them to, and like we said, Australia. It remained little used under Scots law until the early 19th century. In Australia, a convict who served part of his time might apply for a ticket of leave, permitting some prescribed freedoms. This enables some convicts to resume a more normal life, to marry and raise a family and continue the development of the colony. So even convicted convicts who were sent to the penal colony of Australia were able to try to have a normal life. So it goes to show you that you can still be in bondage and still living a normal life, having a family, everything like that, contributing to society, but still underneath the capacity as a convict. All right. Historical background. Trend towards more flexibility of sentencing. In the 17th and 18th centuries, criminal justice in England was severe. Exactly like I was saying, the way how justice is now, this is way better compared to what it was back then. Way better. All right. Later termed the Bloody Code. This was due to both the particularly large number of offenses which was punishable by deletion, usually by hanging, and to the limited choice of sentences available to judges for convicted criminals. With modifications to the traditional benefit of clergy, and for you to have that, we're going to look at benefit of clergy as well, which originally exempted only clergymen from the general criminal law, it developed into a legal fiction by which many common offenders of clergible offenses were extended the privilege to avoid execution. All right, so for those to get the benefit of clergy, you had to be tied to the church. And then when you got the benefit of clergy, for them to know that you were part of the church, the justice had told you to read a specific scripture, and you had to have to know it. And we know during this time, because the church was the state church, everyone had to go to church who was part of the church. There was no like say, oh, I'm not going. No, you had to go to church. So they knew if you weren't part of the church, if you couldn't say that specific scripture. So therefore, you wouldn't get the benefit of the clergy. And then if you did get benefit of the clergy, you're only able to get it once. All right, so it says, so crucial for the benefit of clergy was a fundamental feature of the penal system, but to prevent its abuse, its pardoning process was used more strictly. Prisoners were carefully selected for transportation based on information about their character and previous criminal record. It was arranged that they failed a reading test, that was to read the scripture, but they were then reprieved and held in jail without bail to allow time for a royal pardon, subject to transportation to be organized. All right, so if you failed the reading test, you was jailed. I mean, of course, they didn't delete you, but you went to jail. All right, without bail. Oh my God. All right, so it says many offenders were pardoned as it was considered unreasonable to execute them for relatively minor offenses. But under the rule of law, it was equally unreasonable for them to escape punishment entirely. With the development of colonies, transportation was introduced as an alternative punishment. Although legally it was considered a condition of a pardon rather than a sentence itself. Convicts who represented a menace to the community were sent away to distant lands. A secondary aim was to discourage crime for fear of being transported. Exactly, like how today, now you're starting to hear them say that they're going to start transporting or deporting those who are considered criminals or worse criminals to society. So like I'm explaining here, what was going on back then is happening now. And astrologically, This exactly what they say was going to happen if you understood the movement of the stars. Because like I said, it's a pattern, it's a schedule, it's a cycle that repeats. All right. So it said, convicts who represented a minister community were sent away to the distant lands. Secondary aim was to discourage for fear of being transported, and the transportation continued to be described as a public exhibition of the king's mercy. So it was the king's mercy in regards that you were getting transported. It was a solution to a real problem in the domestic penal system. There was also the hope that transported convicts could be rehabilitated and reformed by starting a new life in the colonies. Pause. So it's almost like, in a way, they wanted you up out of there and they just wanted you to just stay where you are once they sent you out to the colonies. Brothers and sisters, I hope you understand what's being said. Now, hopefully, because I'm going to start throwing my interjections in there soon to explain my opinion, especially about that whole so-called slave narrative and why those folks who they say from Africa then haven't came to try to get, their people. All right. So, or claim people. It says there was also the hope that, I already read that. So in 1615, in the reign of James I, a committee of the council had already obtained the power to choose from the prisoners those that deserved pardon and consequently transportations to the colonies. Pause. So once again, brothers and sisters, this is going back to King James I, your Bible, the author, the editor of your Bible, the King James Version Bible. During his time, they were transporting your ancestors here to the so-called colonies. So that's why I'm saying your genealogy. If you can tie your genealogy back to the 1600s, you're good. Because right there you have proof based off of those names that this is who your ancestors were without doubt or contradiction. The problem is many of you are going to have a hard time accepting it because of the American Indian narrative. I'm not saying that they weren't here. Yes, they were here. And yes, you probably have ancestry who's tied to them, but you are tied to them based off of marriage, which means that you merged into the line by what we call an operation of co-populating or breeding, what they will say. All right, so that's how a lot of you got that. But as you go back further, some of you don't. A lot of you don't have no so-called American Indian ancestry. You only think you do because of what you have been taught, and many of them have to be taught that narrative, so therefore they can be saved from what we're going down. As you can see, a lot of them was considered criminals, convicts. Some was runaways who are trying to escape, and a lot of those runaways, for them to be saved, they had to do what? They had to blend in with the so-called American Indian tribes at that time. That's the reason why that whole 15, 16, 1700 time frame is a little foggy to many of you. Is because of no one's really explaining that to you the way that you need. And that's why I'm saying today, for those of you who are doing a great work, understand your story. Don't try to understand a whole group story from a group you don't even know that you come from. Understand your story from an individual first and tie yourself back to the group. And you can't stop in the 1800s and say like, oh, well, my ancestors were Native Americans. That don't work. That's not how genealogy works. Genealogies don't stop in the 1800s, especially if you claim yourself a descent from a specific ancestor. That's what genealogy means. So you tie yourself lineally to a specific ancestor in time and history. So with these names we have, you should be able to tie yourself back to an ancestor who actually have that surname that can be tied back to what we call a letters patent. All right. So I don't want to get too lost into that, but understand that this was all happening during the time of King James I. What this is during the time what we say was the conquest of Ireland via the Stuarts as well as the Tudors, but the Tudors was doing it first and then the Stuarts. And so that meant that they were sending those prisoners, those convicts, those who they consider criminals, especially political criminals, they were sending them here. So for those of you, like I'm explaining, the Irish, the Gaelic people, they were sending you over here to America. That's the reason why a lot of you have those Irish surnames, or those Gaelic Irish surnames, It's because your ancestors were sent over here first. I'm not talking about the ones who migrated over here after the colonies and were all said and done, and then they became the several states, and then you had immigrants come over. I ain't talking about those folks. I'm talking about the ones who were sent over here first. All right. And it says the convicts were chosen carefully. The acts of the Privy Council showed that prisoners for strength of body or other abilities shall be thought fit to be employed in foreign discoveries or other services beyond the seas. Pause. Who do you think they were talking about? Who do you think they were speaking of? Brothers and sisters. So as you see, it was written in law. This was an act of parliament by the king's act of privy council, that they wanted those who was considered able-bodied prisoners fit, strong, robust, to go out and be employed in foreign discoveries. So they may not have had discovered it yet, but once they did, you were sent with them. And whatever other service you had to offer, whatever trade you had to offer beyond the seas. And the seas we talk about in the Americas. And you can also learn about Africa as well, but we ain't talking about them right now. We're talking about the Americas. And King James had 3 charters. 3 Virginia charters. During the Commonwealth, Oliver Cromwell overcame the popular prejudice against subjecting Christians to slavery or selling them to foreign parts, and initiated group transportation of military and civilian prisoners. You hear this? So underneath Oliver Cromwell, prisoners of war and those civilian prisoners, those are the ones who they want, like, oh, we're going to send them. And eventually you turned up to become slaves. So those who they sent out as prisoners became indentured servants as employed. And then eventually, if those who didn't become free at that time, depending on what was going on, they changed it over to full-blown chattel slavery. And yes, you still, of course, had some who still had indentures, but then that they were working incongruent with those who was underneath full-blown chattel slavery. So it says, with the restoration, the penal transportation system and the number of people subject to it started to change inexorably between 1660 and 1720. All right, this is now during Charles the First and Second, and then it's getting on to Queen Anne, and then the King George the First. So, oh yeah, and then we got William Orange and all that. So with transportation replacing the simple discharge of clergible felons after branding the thumb. So once they brand the thumb, you can no longer utilize the you couldn't utilize clergy protection no more. It was over. You got it just that one time. So you couldn't get benefit of clergy, brothers and sisters, after that one time branding. So alternatively, under the Second Act dealing with the moss trooper brigands on the Scottish border, offenders had their benefit of clergy taken away, or otherwise at the judge's discretion, were to be transported to America, there to remain and not to return. So for those of you, once again, who would be called the Ulster Scots, you can return. Also those who were known as the Jacobites, who were sent to the colonies in America, you couldn't return. Those who were also known as specific criminals or military prisoners or civilian prisoners who were in Ireland and England during these times, you could not return. And then if you couldn't afford to. So you had to make the colonies, which eventually turned to the several states, your home. And now, brothers and sisters, the year is 2026, going all the way back to 1776. You do the math. That's how long many of you have been here as so-called criminals, descendants of criminals. And remember, you got to add another 100, almost 200 years onto that. For those who have ancestry who were seen here before the cutoff date. I don't think y'all understand how important this information is and why no one have come to explain it this way. See, I'm not talking about the monarchies, because the monarchies did what they did. I'm talking about those who were sent over here. Those who were sent over here who didn't want to be sent over here, who didn't have a choice, who were forced to stay here and to make this a life. And a lot of the descendants today are suffering since they've been here, brothers and sisters. Y'all don't understand. People have been suffering since they've been here, just trying to make it work. Who was labeled so-called Negro, whose true ancestry or nationality is either England, Ireland, or Scotland, but have been confused for so long because you have those who look like them who not only put them in this mess, but was carrying out those ancient orders. These are ancient orders, brothers and sisters, that you just don't even think exist today, that it's still playing out. And your ignorance of not knowing this is the reason why it's going to continue to keep repeating. Like they said, the goal was for you to be rehabilitated. I've said this many times, and this is even before going to the ecclesiastical aspect of the spiritual point of it. Your obligation and duty, as when they sent you over here as convicts, as criminals, of course they wanted you to be employed, but in the spiritual sense, it was for you to be rehabilitated. Rehabilitated. So this is how you be revived or be reborn again, brothers and sisters, by now remembering. I'm bringing you back your full conscious, but you can't be acting like what they would seem and deem undesirable in the eyes of society. And everyone don't want to do this. Look what's going on. That's the reason why so many so-called societies, historically, anciently, kingdoms that existed are no longer existing today. They're defunct. A lot of clans and tribes don't exist today. They're defunct because of the traditions, the customary practice, the laws, all of those things that they had. The people to revive them are living that accordingly. They never told you couldn't be who you say you were, but there's an outlet and a way that has to be done for you to be able to do so, because there's various different people over here who are also want to live out their ancestral traditions and customs and things of that nature. But then you have those who don't want to stay here any longer. They're ready to go back to their ancestral homelands and live a peaceful life, because now they have realized like what it is they needed. They have been rehabilitated. They are those old souls who have reincarnated to hear this information for the first time ever, that you now have the right to be able to go home and to be able to rest, because you come from, or the blood is still tied to the land that it's come from, brothers and sisters. The land she's calling home. She's calling home. She's calling her children home to be able to rest again, to help her again. If you can hear that call, and not many people can hear it. And that's why I'm saying this is an uncomfortable truth in regards of history that many of us don't know, that has either just been shrouded over other so-called narratives, because based off of what we're reading, they saw you as undesirable and they didn't want you to return. So now it makes perfect sense why in this fictitious world, they're going to come up with so many different timelines and all these so-called beliefs for you, this ideologies for you to gravitate to, and all these so-called different versions of history for you to think that's yours because of some type of emotional connection without you actually even doing the great work from a genealogical, chronological standpoint to prove that that's who you are. Some of you say you're doing your genealogy, you're going too far back, way too far back. You're not understanding the point of going to a specific time in history that's important that you need to understand, because that point is what it is you. From what happened back then from 1189, that's already understood. You already been these people all the way up until when you came here to the colonies. That's when you were cut off. When you were sent via transportation, you were cut off. Now you're reattaching because now you have the memory. But with memory comes what? Accountability, responsibility. You can't just say like, oh, these such and such did to me, or these folks did that to us. You have to now be held accountable for whatever it was that was taking place, and then accept it. Accept history for what it was. We can't change it, but what we do today, based off of the understanding of who we are, we can do the best that we can. No one said we have to be perfect. Remember, we've been asleep for over 400 years, not knowing, forced to not know, to remember. Almost 400 years. All right, so let's go ahead and continue. The system changed one step at a time. In February 1663, after the first experiment, a bill was proposed to the House of Commons to allow the transporting of felons, and was followed by another bill presented to the Lords to allow the transportation of criminals convicted of felony within clergy or petty larceny. These bills failed, but it was clear that the change was needed. Transportation was not a sentence in itself, but could be arranged by indirect means. The reading test, crucial for the benefit of clergy, was a fundamental feature of the penal system, but to prevent its abuse, this pardoning process was used more strictly. Prisoners were carefully selected for transportation based on information about their character. Brothers and sisters, your character is important. And previous criminal record. It was arranged that they failed the reading test, but they were then reprieved and held in jail without bail to allow time for royal pardon subject to transportation to be organized. So your character, brothers and sisters, once again, that's what I'm saying. You have to be of sound character. Your heart needs to be in the right place. Even with this, remember, genealogy, when you tie yourself back to the group, you can't come back with that heavy heart that many of you still have. A lot of you still have a lot of animosity still from what happened or what's going on to you now presently, and you putting on to carrying with you. That's an energy, or what we call, that's an illness. And sick people have to stay quarantined, aka you have to stay here. You can't come back with that illness of hate in your heart. The way a lot of you think, you cannot return back to the group. You're not going to have the understanding, because this is not something that's coming from me. This is actually something from the Most High. This is a divine walk. This is a divine movement. Remember, intelligence comes from who? From the Most High. So this is the divine intellectual movement. DIM, a divine intellectual movement. So understand that this is what you're doing. You're remembering. You're going back in time. Understand what happened, why it happened, and how did your ancestors play a part in this? Because as we can see, everyone wasn't innocent. And until you can prove that, like I said, we in court, you have to prove your innocence. Otherwise, the conviction stands. Now, we know we're not those folks who were quote unquote convicted, because we are just the descendants. but they had a lifetime conviction, which means they couldn't go back. But that didn't mean that the descendants couldn't return. But if the descendants don't remember, if they don't know who they are, you can't go back. What are you going to inherit? Who's going to recognize you? Do you even know how to act? The tradition, the customs, things of that nature. There's a process. I know folks constantly saying like, oh, I'm tying myself back to specific kings and queens. Yeah, that's nice. But who's your family? This is what I'm saying. Who were you? You weren't those kings. You weren't that queen. That you is a descendant of them. I'm a descendant of them too. But that doesn't mean those who I come from was them. Especially when we're talking about the 16, 17, and 1800s. So that's the gap. That's the issue. That's what needs to be filled in. See what I'm saying? That's what needs to be filled in. All right. So transportation as a commercial transaction. Transportation became a business. You hear this? It became a business. They were making money off of you, brothers and sisters. This is what we call the commercial aspect, like they're saying, of what the courts and them were doing when they were selling you in bondage. So let's read it. Transportation became a business. Merchants chose from among the prisoners on the basis of the demand for labor and their likely profits. They obtained a contract from the sheriffs, and after the voyage to the colonies, they sold the convicts as indentured servants. The payment they received also covered the jail fees, the fees for granting the pardon, the clerk's fees, and everything necessary to authorize the transportation. Pause. So the ship owners or whoever paid your way to get transported were claiming you're indentured, brothers and sisters. Do you understand what I'm saying? They were contracting your conviction out to the colonies, to someone, whoever can afford your transport for you being transported over there, as well all of the so-called fees. So whoever was able to pay that owned your indenture. And you had to pay that indenture off through service, what we call sweat equity today. Do you hear this, brothers and sisters? This is where you can kind of get the idea, like, oh yeah, the plantations were similar to prisons. Yes. Yes. The difference is, you know, at least when you're getting out underneath this indentured servitude and you're technically getting paid. Hey, actually, if I'm not mistaken, prisoners today, they make money in there, right? It ain't much, but they make money in there. So a lot of the practices that we're seeing today are just reminiscent of what the foundation of the colonies, aka the plantations, were. Like they say, the apple don't fall too far from the tree, brothers and sisters. And who was considered undesirable back then may be considered undesirable today. All right. I'm telling you, ain't no coincidence in regards to, many of you now should be asking yourself like, oh man, my family had been having these surnames that have been going back to the territory that I'm talking about for quite some time. Yes. Those aren't slave owner names. They're your family names. So it says these arrangements for transportations continued until the end of the 17th century and beyond, but they diminished in 1670 due to certain complications. The colonial opposition was one of the main obstacles. Colonies were unwilling to collaborate in accepting prisoners. The convicts represented a danger to the colony and were unwelcome. You hear that? So they started trying to change it up. They were saying some convicts were just too dangerous and unwelcome. So Maryland and Virginia enacted laws to prohibit transportation in 1670, and the king was persuaded to respect it. The penal system was also influenced by economics. The profits obtained from convicts' labor boosted the economy of the colonies and consequently of England. Nevertheless, it could be argued that transportation was economically deleterious because the aim was to enlarge population, not diminish it. But the character of an individual convict was likely to harm the economy. You hear that? Some convicts, they really would mess the economy up, just like how today, those who they see as criminals are messing the economy up. King William's War, 1688-1697, and part of the 9 Years' War and the War to Spanish Succession, 1701 to 1714, adversely affected merchant shipping and hence transportation in the and hence transportation. Exactly. Remember, because the merchants were the ones that were dealing with the deporting or transportation or of those who consider criminals. All right. In the post-war period, there was more crime and hence potentially more executions, and something needed to be done. In the reigns of Queen Anne, 1702-14, and George I, 1714 and 1727, transportation was not easily arranged, but imprisonment was not considered enough to punish hardened criminals or those who had committed capital offenses. So transportation was the preferred punishment. Yeah, they was just deleting way too many people, and they like, you know what, we got to come up with another way. We got to figure it out and send them over here to the colonies or the Americas. Transportation Act of 1717, also known as the what's the other name to it? The Piracy Act. That's the other name to it. So it says there were several obstacles to the use of transportation. In 1706, the reading test for claiming benefit of clergy was abolished. This allowed judges to sentence clergible offenders to workhouse or a house of correction. But the punishments that then applied were not enough of a disincentive to commit crime. Another solution was needed. The Transportation Act was introduced into the House of Commons in 1717 under the Whig government. It legitimized transportation as a direct sentence, thus simplifying the penal process. So because they was getting too crowded with their prisons, they were just like, you know what? We just need to start just sending folks out. That's why the Transportation Act of 1717 is part of, you know, what we call the transatlantic slave trade. All this is during that time, brothers and sisters. So now, once again, when I say that you may need to quit looking for slave ships and actually going to look for those merchant transportation ships, go look through the court records in regards to what courts were operating at that time based off of the name that you have, that surname. Maybe you might get some information that you may been overlooking that, you know, that pretty much may highlight the understanding that you need. All right. So it says non-capital convicts, clergible felons, usually destined for branding on the thumb, and petty larceny convicts, usually destined for public whipping, were directly sentenced to transportation to the American colonies for 7 years. You hear that? Those for the petty larceny and public whipping, they sent you to the colonies. A sentence of 14 years was imposed on prisoners guilty of capital offenses pardoned by the king. Returning from the colonies before the stated period was a capital offense. So if you came back before your time was over, you got deleted. If you came back and you had complete banishment that you weren't supposed to return, you got deleted. So as you can see, brothers and sisters, either way around, you weren't going to be able to return, and it was going to be hard for you to return during this time. Now you can understand why no one came and got you. No one came and got you because they couldn't. And they couldn't come from so-called the British Isles or Great Britain to come and get you, because guess what? And you did have family there who probably wanted to get those who were so-called sent out erroneously. You have family, brothers and sisters, who's still over there. But so much time has went by, you forgot. The goal, like I'm saying, is to reattach yourself back to the tree. Back to the tree, to be revived again, to be reborn again, because you just forgot. We all forgot. We all forgot. And like I'm saying, you have those who have connection who want to be underneath new identities. That's fine. But they have to stay here where those identities were created in the fiction. You see what I'm saying? That's how deep this goes. That's how deep the rabbit hole goes. Because your identity or the ideology that you believe in today, before you fail, what country was operating underneath that ideology? Exactly. So that's what I'm saying. You have to be able to prove without doubt or contradiction what I'm saying, especially if you're going to be tying yourself back to your specified group. So I know folks are going to say like, oh, I got English genealogy, Irish, Scottish, as well as French. Some going to say I got Scandinavian. Some going to say I got Spanish, Portuguese. That is all fine and dandy, brothers and sisters. But when you're tying yourself to a specific group, you have to embody what it is that makes up that group. It's no different than back then when you went to Ireland. You had to embody what it was to be the Irish people. That's what that saying come from. They were more Irish than the Irish comes from, because when you go to these territories, you're supposed to embody the people, the culture, the language, become one with them. Things of that. That's how you actually become part of the identity, the connection. But many of you, when y'all travel, even today, you don't try to learn to embody the culture. And that's the reason why they don't want you there as tourists. Because not only you're not coming here to learn to embody the culture, but you're seen now as undesirable. Because what are you bringing? What are you doing to enhance their way of life, or even your way of life, to take back to your group that you came from? And many of you can't even explain that. Many of you are going to think like, say, oh, well, everybody have the right to do whatever they want to do. You're absolutely right. You do have free will. But when you're tied to a group, like they say, some of those freedoms have to be what? Had to be relinquished. If you want to do an individual lifestyle, yeah, you can do that. They call that stateless people. But if you're tying yourself back to the group, you got to do what the group is known to be. You got to follow the group rules. That's what society is. Society is also considered a group. So if you want to be part of the society you're in today, hey, that's fine. You got to follow their rules. Embody that, become that. But if you're going back to who it was before you failed, then you know what must be done for that to be recognized and approved. All right, so it says the bill was introduced by William Thompson, the Solicitor General, who was the architect of the transportation policy. Thompson, the supporter of the Whigs, was a recorder of London and became a judge in 1729. He was a prominent sentencing officer at the Old Bailey and the man who gave important information about capital offenders to the cabinet. Pause. Remember, that's what we've been talking about, the Old Bailey proceedings, brothers and sisters. That's what we've been talking about, Old Bailey proceedings 1 and 2. And I only just gave you a few cases in regards to show you that those who looked like me, like you and I, are those folks who actually, this was your nationality. This was the nation you come from before you or your ancestors were dispelled or transported or deported over here to work, to become employed in the colonies, the plantations. But you forgot. So the Old Bailey, because of it's the legal world, I utilize those documents to hopefully be able to bring you back to life So that way, instead of you listening to these authors from third party sources, you're going to go straight to the horse's mouth. We're going to go to the court. And no man can dispute the court records. You can't dispute those records. So that's why we're standing on law. And yes, like I said, unfortunately, is not the best time in regards to what's happened to us judicially. But nevertheless, these are the facts to help bring you back to life. So therefore, you don't go, like I said, following the blind, because the blind has been leading the blind for so long. That's the reason why many of you have not been getting the remedies you've been looking for. Why you think you haven't been getting those so-called, it's the word I'm thinking of. It's that word folks constantly keep asking for, reparations. Reparations. Yeah, asking for reparations, but you don't know who you are, where you come from. And reparations to repair a nation. So this is why, and they're playing with you, brothers and sisters. That's what I'm saying. They're playing with your intelligence. They got you going in circle. Bum, bum, bum. Oh, and around you go. They got you going in circles, brothers and sisters. This is a game to them. This is a game to them until the music stops. And when the music stops, it's best that you be in a chair. You better be in the right capacity that you need to be in. That's the reason I'm saying, get your household in order, brothers and sisters. We're showing you the way. But your heart had to be lighter than the feather. You got to be able to work together. You got to think about the family. Have to think about your fellow man, your fellow woman, your kinfolk, your extended kin, the people in your community, those who you call your leaders, and your leaders better be caring about you. They all better have the best interest at heart. They should be raised up amongst you. So therefore, you know, this is what I'm saying. We forgot. I know a lot of people, I know, yes, we're tired. I'm tired. But if you think about it, we haven't even done the work, because the great work is remembering. And many of you haven't done that because your heart hasn't been put in the right place. So now you have men and women fighting amongst each other. You see your birth rate is down. You don't see new elders, leaders. Everyone want to live in the infantile state, in the position that we call arrested development. You're operating like the folks who they consider undesirable back then, brothers and sisters. Now, maybe the people back then weren't as bad in their actions, and maybe they were. But nevertheless, undesirables. You were supposed to be upright people. You were supposed to have manners. Like they say, you're supposed to have been rehabilitated for whatever that rehabilitation is. You're just supposed to be good people. Good people who do random acts of kindness all the time. Who have love in your heart. Who want the best, not just for yourself, but for others around you, and actually can work with each other. Not with that me, I individual mentality. That's not a group think. That will not preserve anyone. So as you can see, you're suffering due to a lack of knowledge. Let's continue. So it says, one reason for the success of this act was the transportation was financially costly. The system of sponsorship by merchants had to be improved. Initially, the government rejected Thompson's proposal to pay merchants to transport convicts, but 3 months after the first transportation sentences were pronounced at the Old Bailey, his suggestion was proposed again, and the Treasury contracted Jonathan Ford, a London merchant, for the transportation to the colonies. So once again, brothers and sisters, it's the merchants, the merchants is those who you consider the slave owners. It's the merchants. The merchants were the ones that were making the money And based off of that, because you had to pay your way, remember, whoever was coming to get you at the docks had to pay who? The merchant. They had to pay the merchant. So this was how they were, quote unquote, buying people through this process. Like I said, so it wasn't even slavery yet in the colonies. It was indentured servitude. The business was entrusted to Ford in 1718 for each prisoner transported overseas. He was paid £3, equivalent to 570 pounds in 2025, rising to £5 in 1727, equivalent to 880 pounds in 2025. The Treasury also paid for the transportation of prisoners from the home counties. Let's look at the home counties. The term home counties describes a number of English counties close to London. Brothers and sisters, that's what I'm explaining. They would send it even to English people. Those of you who have English names today, they were sending you from out of the home counties, from your homelands. So yes, this may be the so-called English Empire, but this was the English Empire for what? Convicts, criminals. You see what I'm saying? And yes, everybody wasn't considered convicts and criminals who came over as indentured servants, and everybody who came over weren't also underneath indentured servitude, who would be classified underneath as English, Irish, and Scottish. It was those who were going against the agenda. Like they say, military prisoners, civilians, debtors, those who they consider as regular criminals, all right, and those who's considered political prisoners. So they could have came from any territory at that time. But also, too, you could have had free folks who came from the same place. So that's why this had to be said and explained, because many people are looking at it from one perspective. But you have to see it from both perspectives and have to see that people from both sides, whether you was in bondage or not, were all still coming from the same territory to so-called colonize this area, what we call the English Empire, which eventually became the British Empire, which eventually became the free and several states, which eventually became the United States of America today. And all of those folks, aka the descendants of those people who got sent over here, are still here. They're still here, and many of them have not bred or mixed in with anybody or anyone new. They just stayed with the same type of group, aka those who came from England, Ireland, and Scotland. Brothers and sisters, that's what I'm saying. Look at that. Look at your pedigree. Look at your pedigree. That's where I think why God or the ancestors made sure I did this. Why? Because I used to deal with dogs or breeding dogs, and I understand the importance of genetics and nutrition and things of that nature. And I was able to understand that, to see and put ourselves as humans in the same category. Why? Because our ancestors were operating off of this. That's the reason why they have the books of genealogies of those kingdoms, to know who was who. Things of that nature. We weren't just mixing with just random folks because, oh, we were in love, or, you know, we felt some type of way about them. No, things were done for a reason. There was order. There was order. There was literally legit order back then. In some ways, better than how we're operating today, especially when it comes down to the family. There was order. What we see today is completely chaos. There is no family structure. Everybody just trying to do whatever they can to survive in a falling, burning house. And at this point, people don't even live in houses no more. They either living in their cars or an apartment or some other so-called structure, but it's not a family structure where a man, a woman, and children are at. It's now either just a woman and some kids, or a man by himself and he's seeing his kids on the weekend. All this stuff, brothers and sisters, is designed. These are considered criminal acts and actually outside the clergy, aka the ecclesiastical law. So as you see, in a way, they want to keep you lawless in some shape, fashion, or form. Because who's going to accept unlawful people? What group is going to take folks who can't follow any type of directions? Who's going to come and want you? Because if you don't have any type of proper rearing, if you can't follow sound directions, instructions, who's going to want you to be part of that society or that group? I know many of you probably say you don't care, and that's exactly the way they want you to think. They want you to not care. They want you to not care. They want you to be hardened and bitter. They want that, because that way you can't return home. You see what I'm saying? This, as I'm explaining to you, brothers, this is deeper than you think. And many of you probably say you don't want to go to what I'm explaining to the British Isles or whatever, but it's bigger than that. It's bigger than that. But you don't see it right now because of the way you feel, the way you think. And the way you think is the way how it will operate or make you move until new information comes in that you can accept. And this information, because it's coming from a lawful position placed, like I said, just the Criminal Law Act of 1776, penal transportation. This is law. I'm not making this stuff up. You can go verify yourself. It historically happened, and it's historically accurate. And part of that historical accuracy, your ancestors were part of it. Those people who you come from, and unfortunately, you think you come from some other so-called group, and now you operate on a whole nother different software that is counterintuitive from the software or the understanding that you should be operating off of. And I digress from that. So let's continue. So it says, the term home county describes a number of the English counties close to London. There is no precise definition, but the counties bordering London are most likely to be described as members, namely Berkshire, Buckinghamshire, Hertfordshire, Essex, Kent, and Surrey. All right. And that's the home counties. The Felons Act, as the Transportation Act was called, was printed and distributed in 1718, and in April 27, men and women were sentenced to transportation. The act led to significant changes. Both petty and grand larceny were punished by transportation at 7 years, and the sentence for any non-capital offense was at the judge's discretion. In 1723, an act was presented in Virginia to discourage transportation by establishing complex rules for the reception of prisoners, but the reluctance of colonies did not stop transportation. So like they said, even because the colonies didn't want them, that didn't stop them. That, hey, you ain't got that right. If we're telling you, if the justice system saying this was going down, this was going down. Now, of course, like they say, some colleges like Maryland or whatever, King did listen, but nevertheless, the operation didn't stop. It says, in a few cases before 1734, the court changed sentences of transportation to sentences of branding on the thumb or whipping by convicting the accused for lesser crimes than those of which they were accused. This manipulation phase came to an end in 1734. With the exception of those years, the Transportation Act led to a decrease in whipping of convicts, thus avoiding potentially inflammatory public displays. Clergible discharge continued to be used when the accused could not be transported for reasons of age or infirmity. So if you was too old, they knew you weren't gonna make it, or some other reason, like you was mentally messed up and stuff like that, they wouldn't about to try to send you out. Women and children, because this is something that a lot of folks just think that it was just only just men, and of course we know they weren't just men. We know women and children are involved too. So penal transportation was not limited to men or even to adults. Men, women, and children were sentenced to transportation, but its implementation varied by sex and age. By 1660 to 1670, highway robbery, burglary, and horse theft were the offenses most often punishable with transportation for men. In those years, 5 of the 9 women who were transported after being sentenced to deletion were guilty of simple larceny, an offense for which benefit of clergy was not available for women until 1692. So yeah, women had it bad before they got the right for benefit of clergy. And like they say, for offenses that was a lot petty or a lot considered petty at that time, like simple larceny, they potentially could have got deleted or could have got sentenced to deletion. So it said also merchants preferred young and able-bodied men for whom there was a demand in the colonies. So once again, we know who was those able-bodied men who they wanted in the colonies. And then we know what territory. But now you know from the time frame from where you've been told about history, about slavery, you now know who they were actually so-called sending to this so-called territory of the Americas. All right. Because based off of what we know what was going down at the time, they weren't in Africa. And I know, yes, they're going to talk about the African company, the Royal African Company. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. Maybe not today. But when we're speaking about the original people who they were peopling in the colonies or the plantations in America, were those who were already coming from the territory that they were occupying. And that is their own homeland, aka England, Ireland, and Scotland. Says also, all of these factors meant that most women and children were simply left in jail. Some magistrates supported a proposal to release women who could not be transported, but this solution was considered absurd. This caused the Lords Justices to order that no distinction be made between men and women. Yep, there you go. They wanted that the equal rights, and unfortunately the equal consequence, which is horrible. In this case, women were sent to the Leeward Islands, the only colony that accepted them, and the government had to pay to send them overseas. In 1696, yeah, so remember, whenever the government had to pay, they had to find out ways to recoup that money. In 1696, Jamaica refused to welcome a group of prisoners because most of them were women. You hear that? Barbados similarly accepted convicts, but not women, children, nor other infirm persons. So they did have a cutoff. Like, they just wanted the men. That's the reason why many of you, too, when you're doing your genealogy, you're going to have a hard time finding the women because they were individuals. They were individual sentences and stuff like that. So, like, when you get into, like, the 1700s or even, like, the 1800s, when you start going back, you're going to start finding out that you're going to have a hard time finding specific people, individuals, like certain women in the family, things like that, or even the men. And now you're going to see, because of everybody in our family, we're not underneath the same capacity. That's just how it is, or how it was. So it said, thanks to transportation, the number of men whipped and released diminished, but whipping and discharge were chosen more often for women. You hear that? The reverse was true when women were sentenced for a capital offense, but actually served a lesser sentence due to a manipulation of the penal system. One advantage of this sentence was that they could be discharged thanks to the benefit of clergy, while men were whipped. Women with young children were also supported since transportation unavoidably separated them. The facts and numbers revealed how transportation was less frequently applied to women and children because they were usually guilty of minor crimes and they were considered a minimal threat to the community. Pause. So even though there were women and children being transported, aka deported, it was the majority of them were still men because they preferred to have able-bodied individuals working, to make things happen. So yeah, so that's the reason why a lot of folks were cut off from the maternal connection, because they sent the paternal side to the colonies, and then the paternal side probably end up, marrying into the American or the indigenous culture here, or the indigenous people here in America, which we know happened, and then started the family, which now you have the European side and the so-called American Indian side. And this is what that whole so-called African American misnomer comes from. It's not African per se, brothers and sisters. It's coming from the British Isles or Great Britain. They don't want you to know that, but I'm explaining it to you. And the proof is inside your name and your genealogy, and the American Indian connection here that many of you still have connection to. So I'm not saying, disconnect yourself from your connection here. What I'm saying is those of us who didn't actually have our ancestry merged into our indigenous brothers and sisters over here, even though we still lived alongside with them, still may took on their customs and things of that nature, but have a lot of our connection and ties, still want to bring us back to the ancestral land that the ancestors was sent here. Whatever situation, why that happened, is not important, but we still have our right and a claim to return back there. And so much time has went on and no one have explained it. So there will be a lot of confusion. But like they told you, the time was going to come when the messengers were going to return to actually explain to those who need to hear the information the most, but also to explain to you, remind you that there's a way that this has to be done. It ain't like you just jump in the line. It ain't like, oh, I'm automatically going to claim and be these people. No, there's a way how this has to be done. And if you try to move faster than you're supposed to be moving, then I promise you will make a lot of mistakes, because I made mistakes. We all make mistakes, especially when you move too fast. But if you start from the beginning in regards to getting that understanding and getting that part and start learning the histories, that will help you along the way when the next part, when that start being, it's going to reveal to you. That's probably the best way to explain it, because knowledge comes to you in degrees. It don't happen overnight, and can't give you everything all in one sitting. Otherwise, you'll choke on it. So you have to take your time. You have to be patient with it. And sometimes you have to give some time, let some time go by for what you already heard now to be able to rest within you. So be patient, but don't procrastinate. The end of transportation. So the outbreak of the Revolutionary War, 1775, 1783. We know 1783 is the Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Paris, and the reason why I like to stop at 1783, because we know from 1783 all the way to the present day, we're over here now. We're already over here. So I don't need to know anything from after 1783, because I know that all the way to modern day. We need to know what happened 1783 and before. Because remember, these are the colonies, aka these are the plantations that your ancestors were employed, aka they were employees. I'm not saying that, they're telling you that they were employees. So the employees, aka we call citizens, residents, have made or were told to make their domicile or their the location of their employment home. Think about that. Your ancestors sent here as criminals first, but became employed, and part of their employment, which that's their capacity, part of that employment, they had to stay here and make it home. Suffering. Missing out their homeland, everything that they knew about themselves, to now be forced at the mercies of the merchants. The mercy of the merchants, privateers, spirits. Disconnected. You literally have been disconnected, brothers and sisters. That is the severance of the blood. They cut you off from the root and and planted you over here into this soil. Now, there is brothers and sisters who are probably making it work. But if we were told it was supposed to be a 400-year bondage, 1619 to 2019, that means you were able to go back home. But you made this place, I'm not saying it's wrong, because I love it here as well, for what it has to offer. But if I'm seeing that the land is calling me back to a different place because of the blood was within me, because she needs help, she needs healing. Even here, remember, the land of the merchants, which is the West, the land of the walking, you know, the land needs to rest here. Remember, think about it. They've been doing business over 400 years of occupation on the land. It hasn't rested. We need rest. If the land been worked, that means who's working it? You. If the land needs rest, who else needs rest? The people. That's the reason why we're mentally drained, brothers and sisters. That's the reason why you see all of this calamity and chaos going on. What we call fatigue. People are tired. Look at the cost of rent. You need to have 2 or 3 so-called jobs for you to so-called survive. There ain't that many hours in a day. People are spent. We are dealing with what? These electric, or we call it extremely low frequency devices that's constantly pulling on you. Our society, everywhere we go, is full of what? Positive ions that weakens the body. I know I'm going on a tangent or a rant. But you need to know this. You need to know what's going on. You need to know what happened. So therefore, you know where you're going. Because right now, many of you think you know where you're going. You have no idea because you don't know the script. And the narrative that you believe or the script you think that you know, it got you doing the same stuff that your predecessors were doing because they thought they were operating on the same so-called script. Yeah, the script, the ones who put you into this illusion have you operating off of. But it's another script. It's another story there that what this is talking about. This script, there's a parallel reality that was created, that was there, that existed, what we call the ancient world, the old world. That still exists, that's still operating here simultaneously with the fiction that you're living in right now. But you can't return to that world, the true world, the non-fiction reality, until you actually have been rehabilitated and have the right principles and faculties within you and within your heart for you to come home right and clean. And like I'm saying, you can't do what you're doing here back home. You call this home because you've been here for so long. And yeah, you have that right. But there's another place that we call home, that we call home is where the heart is. And the heart chakra of the planet, believe it or not, is in the British Isles. That's the reason why I always keep saying X marks the spot. X marks what? Home. Home, brothers and sisters. All right, so Parliament claimed that the transportation of convicts of His Majesty's colonies and plantations in America is found to be attended with various inconveniences, particularly by depriving this kingdom of many subjects whose labor might be useful to the community and who, by proper care and correction, might be reclaimed from their evil course. They then passed the Criminal Law Act 1776, an act to authorize the punishment by hard labor of offenders who, for certain crimes, are or shall become liable to be transported to any of His Majesty's colonies and plantations. Pause. So once again, because they want you to be rehabilitated, they felt that hard labor was going to be the way to rehabilitate you, brothers and sisters. Think about it. Because remember, they're operating off the ecclesiastical orders or ecclesiastical script, you know, where it was known to just work was the way to keep people from doing, like I said, what they say, idleness is the devil's playground. So to make sure to keep you from being idle, they worked you. Because they felt, based off of a lot of convictions, there was a lot of those who's considered vagabonds, those who were just soliciting, those who were just hanging out, like how we see today, a lot of brothers and sisters who just was causing mischief and not employed or not doing anything productive. And then they didn't have proof of what they were doing, especially if they were claiming to be employed, or in regards to, like I said, the monies that they were having on their persons, and they couldn't prove how they come about in getting that money. So, like I'm saying, what's going on now was already happening back then, because the fruit don't fall too far from the tree. It says an act to authorize the punishment by hard labor offenders who, for certain crimes, are or shall become liable to be transported to any of His Majesty's colonies and plantations. They had the Criminal Law Act of 1778 as well as 1779. So, said for ensuring decade, men were instead sentenced to hard labor and women were imprisoned. Finding alternative locations to send convicts was not easy, and the act was extended twice. The act was extended twice by the Criminal Law Act of 1778 and the Criminal Law Act of 1779. And these were all done by King George III. So this resulted in a 1779 inquiry by a parliamentary committee on the entire subject of transportation and punishment. Initially, the Penitentiary Act 1779 was passed, introducing a policy of state prisons as a measure to reform the system of overcrowded prison hulks that had developed, but no prisons were ever built as a result of the act. The Transportation Act of 1784 and the Transportation Act of 1785 also resulted to help alleviate overcrowding. Both acts empowered the Crown to appoint certain places within his dominions or outside them as the destination for transported criminals. The acts would move convicts around the country as needed for labor or where they could be utilized and accommodated. Brothers and sisters, so once again, you were contracted to be employed as workers. They were working you, they were working us. And how they were working us back then, they're working us now. And now we're getting worked even harder. They have to have 2 or 3 jobs just to survive, brothers and sisters. So we're in a work predicament than they just were back then. Yeah, they were getting whipped, but we're getting whipped too in multiple different ways. It's just not physically being lashed out, but our health is suffering because a lot of us can't afford health care. A lot of us can't afford food. A lot of us can't afford to pay bills. A lot of us can't even afford to have a relaxing life. You can't even afford to relax, brothers and sisters. Think about how crazy that sounds. You can't even afford to relax. So ask yourself, once again, are you truly free? Are you truly free? You may have some liberties out there that look like, or excuse me, some privileges out there that like freedoms and liberties. Yeah, I'll give them that. But in actuality, look how much it costs for you to survive. It's astronomically expensive. And the judicial system is just as bad. It's still bad. Still broken. And that's the reason why I'm saying that this work, only a few are going to really do it because of what's required. I can't expect everyone to get right. Only one I can really get right is myself. That's why it says to save yourself first. So get your house in order first. I'm showing you how it can be done, where you can help others once you do what you need to do. But ultimately, once you are on that path, don't fall off. Don't fall off. Don't expect to see others jump on it before you jump on it. If you feel a calling, if it's in your heart, then it's meant for you to start doing the work. Follow the directions. Get the comprehension you need. Stop putting or filling your mind up with so much information and consuming so much that you don't know what to do with it. Because remember, you can only hold a certain amount of information within your mind or in your brain, brothers and sisters. So it's best to have what's important in there, and what's not, or what you can't prove, I will probably put that to the side. No one's saying it's wrong to have an imagination. Yes, have it. But even with your imagination, you don't want to take that too far. That's the reason why I'm saying, especially when you're living in a reality that is predicated off of facts, you better have information that you can stand on that allows you to be able to stand in that capacity or that position that you're trying to claim to be in or you want to live in. Certain people can only do certain people can do certain things depending on who you are. Everybody can't do the same thing out here. All right. So once again, this is a choice. It's not something that's supposed to be done by force. The choice is all up to you. The overcrowding situation and the resumption of transportation will be initially resolved by orders in council on December 6, 1786 by the decision to establish a penal colony in New South Wales on land previously claimed for Britain in 1770, but as yet not settled by Britain or any other European power. The British policy towards Australia specifically for use as a penal colony. You hear that? So Australia specifically by British policy was supposed to be specifically used for a penal colony for prisoners, brothers and sisters. Within their overall plans to populate and colonize the continent were differentiated from America, where the use of convicts was only a minor adjunct to its overall policy. So even though America had convicts and prisoners there, that was just part of the of their agenda. That was just part of the agenda. All right, because there was more to it. In 1787, when transportation resumed to the chosen Australian colonies, the far greater distance added to the terrible experience of exile, and it was considered more severe than the methods of imprisonment employed for the previous decade. See, so you didn't want to be transported, period, and you definitely didn't want to be sent out to Australia. The Transportation Act of 1790 officially enacted the previous orders in council into law, stating His Majesty hath declared, and he appointed that the eastern coast of New South Wales and the islands thereunto adjacent should be the place or places beyond the seas to which certain felons and other offenders should be conveyed and transported, or other places. The act also gave authority to remit or shorten the time or term of the sentence in cases where it shall appear that such felons or other offenders are proper objects of the royal mercy. So based off of that those who they felt that the crown get used, they lighten your load, they lighten your mercy, your sentence. But that didn't mean that you were coming back to the British Isles or the kingdom no time soon. You probably would still have to stay there because you couldn't afford to return. Like how those who were sent to America couldn't return because they couldn't afford it. Not only could they not afford it, but also those who were exiled permanently, you couldn't come back. And transportation to North America from the early 1600s. This is King James. From the early 1600s to the American Revolution of 1776, that's King George III, the British colonies in North America received transported British criminals. Destinations were the island colonies of West Indies and the mainland colonies that became the United States of America. Pause. So once again, brothers and sisters, I'm showing you that those who they considered so-called criminals, and these criminals were still subjects of the crown. They may not have rights, but they were still the crown property, who your ancestors were sent here to, they said, not only the West Indies, which is Jamaica, the Barbados, and the Caribbean islands, but the mainland colonies. It's the 13 colonies. It could have been 9 out of the 13, but 9 out of 13 is still a big number. And we know that the colonies were sending people back and forth. All right. Like I said, wherever they needed to work, they sent the labor. In the 17th century, transportation was carried out at the expense of the convicts or the ship owners. The Transportation Act 1717 allowed courts to sentence convicts to 7 years transportation to America. In 1720, an extension authorized payments by the crown to the merchants contracted to take the convicts to America. Exactly. So that's letting you know the government was contracting with the merchants, aka the privateers, to get you out here to the Americas to work. All right. The Transportation Act made returning from transportation a capital offense. Exactly. The number of convicts transported to North America is not verified. John Dunmore Lang has estimated 50,000 and Thomas Keneally has proposed 120,000. Maryland received a larger felon quota than any other province. Many prisoners were taken in the battle from Ireland or Scotland and sold into indentured servitude, usually for a number of years. Pause, brothers and sisters. That's your ancestors. Those of you, once again, who got those Scottish and Irish surnames. They were also doing the English too. So I'm not leaving the English out there. Y'all know that they were doing this to all of us. And when I said they, those who were contracted with the so-called government, the privateers, the merchants. All right. The American Revolution brought transportation to North American mainland to an end. The remaining, that didn't mean the slavery or whatever stopped, or indentured servitude stopped. The remaining British colonies in what is now Canada were regarded as unsuitable for various reasons, including the possibility that transportation might increase dissatisfaction with British rule among settlers, and or the possibility of annexation by the United States, as well as the ease with which the prisoners could escape across the border. After the termination of transportation to North America, British prisons became overcrowded, and dilapidated ships moored in various ports were pressed into service as floating galls, known as hulks. That's like jails, brothers, sisters. There's floating prisons out there, aka the ships, or just floating prisons. Following the 18th century experiment in transporting convicted prisoners to Cape Coast Castle, which is modern day Ghana. So they're telling you they were sending brothers and sisters from America, from the Great Britain, the British Isles, to Ghana, and Ngori, Senegal, in West Africa. British authorities turned their attention to New South Wales and what will become Australia. So once again, the 18th centuries to 1700s, they were sending your ancestors to Africa. I don't think y'all understand that and how important this information is, because you think like, oh, that you are from Africa. No, they were sending you to Africa. They were sending folks to Africa underneath transportation. From the 1820s until the 1860s, convicts were sent to the Imperial Fortress colony of Bermuda, part of British North America, to work on the construction, Royal Naval Dockyard, and other defense works related to the east end of the archipelago, where they were accommodated aboard the hulk of HMS Thames at an area still known as Convict Bay in St. George's Town. And I will do Australia, but I already read long enough, about an hour 45 minutes, and just speaking about penal transportation. So brothers and sisters, you should understand, like, this is what happened. This is what happened. Those ships you're looking for, they're not slave ships. That's why you can't find them. So now we're going to go back to, because we now need to see the list of those who were sent via what we call political prisoners, via the Jacobite gleanings. So the transportation since 1745. So remember, we're talking about the Transportation Act, transportation, penal colonies, penal transportation to the Americas. So this is page 48 off of the Jacobite gleanings. They're going to show you who were sent based off of what we call transportation. It says an exact list and description of 150 rebel prisoners shipped at Liverpool on board the veteran John Rickey, master for the Leeward Islands, which were taken near Antigua the 28th of June last by the diamond privateer Paul Marcel, commander, and carried into Martinico the 30th of June, 1747. And remember, we talked about the Leeward Islands when they wanted to send the women there, and they sent them, like, said, nah. So here's some of the names. October 1746. And we have Mr. Robert Adam, age 18, profession, laborer. So remember, they told you those who had specific laborers as well. County Sterling, stature 5 foot, 1 1/4. Remarks, brown, smooth faced. And so you got William Bell, number 2, 46, Weaver, Berwick County, 5'4", black curled hair, strong made. Remember, they told you they wanted those who are what? Strong, robust. Number 3, Dougal Campbell, age 18, servant, Lockaber, stature 5'4", remarks, brown complexion. Brothers and sisters, brown complexion. So as we're reading, these are I would say the indigenous or the original people from that territory who's been sent, as they say, as rebel prisoners, who technically probably they're Jacobites, so they're political prisoners, and they're sending them to the colonies, aka the Americas, the United States, what you call the United States of Americas today. That's what they were doing in 1746 to your ancestors who bore these surnames. So many of you who are probably now listening, who probably question your origins and stuff like that, because now it goes against the narrative that many of you have been thinking and thought that, oh, well, my ancestors were American Indians or Native Americans. If you have not proved that without a shadow of doubt, then that is not you. That is nothing more than an assumption. All right. No longer can stand on assumptions. You need to have documents. You need to have something that says that, because the surnames, like I said, the names that you have corroborates to the same people who were sent over here via the occupation, what we call transportation. All right. Say these brown complexion, well made and ruddy. Alex Kadenak, 17, profession, Miller, County, Badenoch, stature 5'5", black, ruddy, well made, healthy. It's Alex Kadenak. Apologize. Next, we have a Dougal Campbell, 18, servant, County Argyll, stature 5'5" ¼ brown, ditto. So that means that he had to been healthy as well as ruddy. We're gonna go to number 7, John Campbell, age 20, laborer, County Argyll, 5'2" ¼ brown and swarthy. So as we can see, the Campbells are swarthy. We read enough Campbells, and all the Campbells are all swarthy, aka brown complexion. So brothers and sisters who have that Campbell surname out there, and I went to school with quite a few Campbells. This is who your family, your ancestors go to, and Campbell goes back to Scotland. Campbell goes back to Scotland. Y'all are Scotsmen. Y'all are Scotsmen. All right, let's continue. Who else? Alex Davidson, age 17, number 10, 5'3", 3.5", ruddy, slim made. Number 11, Andrew Edwards, age 24, servant, County Angus, 5'5.5", black, well made, strong. And I think the first part when he's saying black, it could be the complexion or it could be the hair. Let's just say hair, just to be on the safe side. So, because yes, there was folks who didn't look like us. I would say who we call the lighter complexion. If they still family, so you had dark skin as well as light skinned people who still were occupiers on both sides, whether they were criminals or they were free folks. So people got to understand that's how it was. It wasn't just that black and white, like, oh, this group of people were just specifically slaves and these folks were specifically just free. No, it was a mixture. All right, so William McLean, number 21, age 32. He's a laborer, County Inverness, 5'3 3/4, black, well set, strong, ruddy. We have James Nielsen, age 26, County Aberdeen, stature 5'5", remarks, black, swarthy, slender, and we know swarthy means brown. And then pause, and that's another reason too why I say, brothers and sisters, you have to know what terms that they were utilizing, especially when they were dealing with complexion of people, because they weren't really utilizing that term black as you think during that time. They were utilizing swarthy, Negro, blackamoor, Moor, all these tawny. These were terms that they were utilizing at that time to describe, people who look like you and I complexion wise. All right. Then you have Daniel Ross, number 42, age 40, profession, servant, county, Ross, stature 5'5", sandy hair, swarthy, well made. We have a John Stewart, number 44, age 18, laborer, County Aberdeen, 5'4 1/4", brown, well made, and ruddy. Because remember, DO means the same as above. Then we have 45, John Smith, 21, profession, goldsmith, County Aberdeen, 5'4", brown, well made. Then we have number 49, George Bain, age 25, laborer from Aberdeen County, 5'5 1/2", black, complexion swarthy. Then we have another John Stewart, number 52, age 18. This one's a laborer as well, from Banff County. He's 5'4 1/4". Nope, doing the wrong one. It's 5'3 1/4". He's from Aberdeen County, and he's brown hair, well made, swarthy complexion. Let's see. Next, we have number 65. Actually, let me go back, because we want to do some women. We have number 60, Eliza McFarland, age 30. She sews, so she's a seamstress or a sewing. That's what it says, sewing company. I would say Perth County. She's 5'8 1/2". Wow, so this is a taller woman. She's taller than the men that we had spoke about already. Black, lusty, and her complexion is ruddy. And we know ruddy means red, so that's like copper color. Then we have another number 65, James Dunbar, age 17. He's a laborer from Murray County, 5 feet, dark complexion, well made. So, brothers and sisters, I hope you see the pattern here, because this is too much proof for you to overlook. Too much proof. So now no longer can say like, oh, we. Who is you? Where did you come from? Have you done your genealogy? This right here will settle a lot of those pointless conversations and talking points. You have number 71, Joseph Brown, age 16. He's a tailor. He's from Banff County, 5'6", dark complexion, well made, and healthy. Then we have let's see. Number 86, Andrew Langer, age 40. Profession, he's a weaver. Dublin County, stature 5'6 3/4", dark complexion, well made, healthy. Then we have number 90, James Donald, age 20. Profession is a tailor. County Merionshire, stature 5'7.5", brown complexion, well made. And other ditto, I would say slender. That's what that DO is underneath that. Then we have number 91, Andrew Matthew, age 32. Profession, he's a monster. County Perthshire, stature 5'5", dark complexion, and he said he's sickly. So there was some sick folks that was getting through. And then we have number 96, Donald McDonald, age 58. He's a servant. Edinburgh County, 5'5", swarthy, and DO at the top, so I would say swarthy and lusty. Then we have number 102, Duncan Campbell, another Campbell, age 16, laborer, Argilish, I hope that's pronounced right. A stature 5 feet, dark complexion, straight, healthy. So those, like I said, those Campbells, man. Let's see. Then we have number 132, George Hume, age 30, writer. He's from Edinburgh County, 5'7", and here they have him listed black man. All right, so we've seen the many different variations of those who we'll call copper color, brown, so-called black, and the terms that they'll use during this time. So brothers and sisters cannot be confused when they find out the truth in regards to who you truly come from, who you descend from, what area or territory of the world you actually have your ancestry from. And that's the reason why we say all skin folk is not kinfolk. And it's not nothing wrong to say that. It's just that all of us who are brown, swarthy, whatever complexion you want to call us, didn't come from the same territory. And I understand that there's a false narrative that has been going around for centuries because of them not wanting us to tie ourselves back to where we come from. And when I say them, I mean those who are called the evildoers, because it's just evil for you not to want people to know who they where they come from, and that can come in many shapes, sizes, and complexions. All right. And then now we have okay, that's it. That's all I'm going to use on there. And then like it says here as a highlighted, said there was an Edinburgh writer, George Hume, age 30, marked as a black man whose color will no doubt suit the West Indies. All right, so that's right here. They already told you his complexion, where he come from, where he was marked to go, based off of his complexion. And we already read the other various people inside there who were sent in. All right, so that's the Jacobite gleanings, transportation in 1745. Stemming what we see from off the penal transportations. Remember, all of this going all the way back to the time of King James the First. Which those proceedings could be found going back to the Old Bailey. So we're going to just use it. So I'm going to show you how I did it. And we're going to actually type in for some other folks. So we already did Negro. We've done Swarthy. Let's type in Blackamoor. Because like I said, you want to utilize the terms that they were utilizing back at that time. And we want to deal with specific time frames. So from 1674 to 1783. Why this time frame? Because we know that they're subjects of Great Britain at this time. All right, so we first case popped on up. James Grantham, theft, grand larceny, October 14th, 1695. So for those of you who identify as Moors, it's the ideology you claim today as Moorish Americans that ties you to that. But those who are known as Moors or Blackamoors are tied to the nationality of the nation they descend from. That's the reason why we say when you do your genealogy, you're going to be who the nationality, your family surname ties you back to. That's the ideology. So it says, trial account, defendants James Grantham, theft, grand larceny, session October 14, 1695, verdicts not guilty. James Grantham, a blackamoor of the parish of St. Bartholomew's by the Exchange, was indicted for feloniously taking a Bible, a hood, a silk gown, a silk petticoat, a fringe, a stuffed gown, and a petticoat, and divers other goods of Rebecca tribe, spinster, on the 28th of September last. Spinster meaning a woman who didn't get married. It appeared that the prosecutor was coming from Newington in a coach, and that the goods were in the trunk behind the coach. And being come to the King's Stand, the trunk was missing, and upon inquiry the next day, they were told that the prisoner was seen to go with a trunk upon his head, and being taken up, he confessed that he had the trunk, and that he found it in the road between Newington and Kingston, and there being no proof that he did take it from behind the coach, the jury found him not guilty. Pause. So since there was no evidence that he actually truly took the trunk, he was found not guilty. Very simple case based off of what we have now just read. And what we see, the defendant himself, Mr. James Grantham, was notated as being a blackamoor of the parish, of St. Bartholomew's. All right, so remember, this is all in London, England, brothers and sisters. So now we want to see the territory that Grantham comes from, because Grantham is this so-called brother who is a blackamoor. This is the territory he comes from. Now, remember, we reread Downs' history from the brother Philip Downs, how his name is not only goes back to Ireland, and he's considered a Negro, but his name, Downs, it says throughout history, very few Irish surnames have exclusively maintained their original forms. Before being translated to English, Downs appeared as Old Dublin or Old Dublin, and where the name means a dark complexioned man. So the brother Philip Downs, not only was he seen or said as a Negro, which we know Negro means black in English, but also his name Downs means dark complexioned man, which we equivalent to which the English terms as well as the Spanish term Negro. All right, so there you have it from that. Now let's go see the Mr. Grantham. Grantham. Now, Mr. Grantham, who's a blackamoor, it says, which we know goes back, that Grantham goes back to England, says the ancient history of the Grantham name begins with the ancient Anglo-Saxon tribes of Britain. So we know the Anglo-Saxon tribes, the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, which they want to say, but in my opinion, it's the Angelic people, who are the Gaels. They were already here because, and which will give proof or ties, in my opinion, to the connection with the blackamoor, because the Moors are tied to the Saxons. All right, so the Moors are tied to the Saxons, and we know the Angles are also those who we call Berbers. So Berbers and Moors, they're all family, they're all the same people. They stem from the same stock, what we call Berber stock, but based off of ideology determines, like I said, what route they went, what tribes they created, what nations they created, what kingdoms they created, et cetera, so forth. So Mr. Grantham, being tied to the Anglo-Saxons, him himself have been a blackamoor, where now you see where his family motto, honore et amore, so honor and love. It says the name is derived from when the family resided in Grantham, a town located in the county of Lincolnshire. The name was derived from the English word grand, which may have been derived from the personal name Granta, and the Old English word ham, meaning homestead. And we know ham also means dark skin, but we go just take it for what they say here, homestead. Early origins of the Grantham family. The surname Grantham was first found in Lincolnshire at Grantham, a market town within the South Kesteven district, which was first listed in the Domesday Book as Grantham. The place name probably meant homestead or village of a man named Granta, derived from the Old English personal name plus ham. Alternatively, the name could have been derived from the Old English word grand, meaning gravel plus ham. See, they even shows Mr. Grantham name in here. Probably not, but not going to worry about it. All right, so there you have it. Mr. James Grantham, an Englishman who was a blackamoor. All right, an Englishman who was a blackamoor. So, what will be the nationality of Mr. James Grantham? English. The nationality he's tied to would be based off of the surname, aka his free name. So the free name of James is Grantham. His surname is Grantham. Surname as high name above his Christian name. His Christian name would be James. All right. And James is another way you say Jacob. Let's see who else. Isaac George. Trial court. Offense, violent theft, highway robbery. Session date, June 28th, 1738. Verdict, guilty. Punishment, deletion. It says Isaac George, a blackamoor, was indicted for assaulting John Gravener in the King's Highway, putting him in fear and taking from here a pair of silver bow scissors valued 5 sterlings, a silver spatula valued 4 sterling, and a silver probe valued $6. I hope that's what that is. A steel crooked needle value $1, a fish skin case with silver hinges and clasps value 10 sterlings, $6, 3 lancers with tortoise shell scales value 3 sterlings, a gum lancet value 1 sterling, a black sugaring case value 5 sterling, a silver seal value 2 sterling, $6, $7 in money, April 30th. And I'm not going to read the rest of that, but we can see the verdict was based off of what he stole and how much it was deletion. Now we want to see Mr. George, where his name goes from. Isaac George of Blackamoor. George. Belgium, England, Germany, Ireland, and Scotland. But due to the fact that we know he's in England, we can accept the fact that he's actually an Englishman. The Anglo-Saxon, and his Anglo-Saxon name. So just like the last brother, we said his name was Anglo-Saxon. So the Anglo-Saxon name George comes from the given name of the father and was typically denoted as the son of George. The personal name George was originally derived from the Greek word, which means someone who was a farmer or someone who worked the land. That's a husband, like I said, so husbandman is technically a George. A George is a husbandman. Another source claims a Norman influence as the Magni Rotuli Scacari Normanii lists Richard and William de St. Giorgio in Normandy, as well as Robert William. Ralph de St. Giorgio were listed there 1180 to 1195. Interestingly, one source notes that the variant Georges was of some note, particularly in Ireland, of the family planted by the Georges of Hastings branches spread over the counties of Hertford, Dorset, Somerset, and Wilts. In the last name shires, it was seated at Longford and possessed so influential a position that St. Edward George of Longford obtained a baronetcy in 1612 and was afterwards raised to the peerage of Ireland as Baron Georges of Dundalk. The charge variant is derived from Garge, Georges, or George Garges from Garges in the continent. Ralph de Georges married the heiress of Morville and acquired her estates in Dorset. Raoul de Georges married an heiress of Morville and had the manors of Wraxall and Bradpool. Blah, blah, read the rest of this yourself. Said the surname George was first found in Dorset, England, where it is noted as somewhat rare name in medieval records. The popularity of the name increased during the Crusades, which brought more contact with the Orthodox Church. St. George, who slew his famous dragon in 303 AD, may have inspired the use of this name. In 1348, King Edward III founded the Order of the Garter under the patronage of St. George, and by 1415, a yearly festival was set in place that continues today. Today, St. George is considered the patron saint of England. Absolutely. That's where the St. George cross that we see on the English flag today comes from, what we call the patron saint, St. George. And we can see this brother, George, who unfortunately received the deletion verdict. Family comes from England, Ireland, Scotland, and he himself was who we call, or what they call, a blackamoor. All right. Let's see. And I think there's other stuff that says Blackamore, but you brothers and sisters can peep that out in your own time. And I'm going to check and see we find one other, which I don't think I did in there. So that is the Old Bailey in regards to showing how many of our predecessors were convicted here via the Old Bailey proceedings, and how many of them were sent underneath what we call transportation. Some were found not guilty. Some, unfortunately, who were found guilty were deleted, and it just shows a whole nother narrative outside what we have been succumbed to over the years. Let's see if anything else. I think that might be it for now. I just want to make sure I didn't forget anything. But like I said, brothers and sisters, this just goes to show you that we have to do our due diligence in regards to going down the rabbit hole and traveling in time. I know, it may not be easy for many of us to do because of time, may not know what to do in regards of what to look for. But if you do take, make that sacrifice by putting the time to the side and reach out with other like-minded brothers and sisters, that's the goal, to bring us together like a community, like how we were back then, what we'll call, what we can call the body of the people. Of course, now, they call it body politic, they call it congregation, assembly, many various terms. But historically, it all still mean the same. And when you do, you get to build with each other. You get to learn. You can revive those traditions and those customary practices and put ourselves back into to a position where we can maintain our continuity moving forward. And you have to know the history. You have to know where you come from to know where you're going. We now live in a time that you have the ability to be able to pick up where our predecessors left off from. The thing is, you must have the facts, so therefore you're not just out here moving off of opinions and emotions that you cannot stand on. And the problem was that we've been doing for so long is we've been allowing those who look like us to lead us astray when they themselves have not done their genealogy. Because if they did, then they would see that you are who you come from. You're not nothing new. And you see, being here in America, you were employed as being so-called an Americans or a citizen or whatever. You are nothing more than employees. So who were you, or who are you outside the occupation of being an employee? The only way for you to know that is you have to do your genealogy and tie yourself back to who those people were before the creation of the plantations and colonies. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel. And hopefully I can continue to keep doing more videos consistently, so therefore you can find yourself coming back home. And if you want to support the channel, you can support me at Cash App $Dion Belmont. Also, if you have any questions or you want any assistance on a one-on-one basis, you can email me at thenobleHouseofBelmont@gmail.com. And then that way we can go ahead and set up a time that's beneficial and easy for you. So therefore we can help build and work with each other. And that way you can get your own home in order based off of the prerequisites that our predecessors have established for us, going all the way back to time immemorial. With that being said, peace.